The ecosystem here has changed significantly.
One of our pride points is that we are providing decent jobs for a handful of people.
Having this farm for the future of our family is why we're doing it.
My name is Sally McGee. I've lived and worked near the ocean, on the ocean, and for the ocean my whole adult life. I've worked on boats as a cook, a deckhand, and as captain. I've worked on ocean policy on Capitol Hill and as a voting member of the New England Fishery Management Council, and I've been an oyster farmer. Now I work on marine conservation for the Nature Conservancy, and I manage the Shellfish Growers Climate Coalition. The ocean and small-town coastal communities are the center of my world. Everywhere there's coastline in America, you'll find shellfish farmers. They wear hip waders instead of overalls, and they drive small boats instead of tractors. But they are farmers just the same. And like all farmers, they're focused on making their farms as productive as they can and making their businesses a lasting legacy. I've spent the last 2 years talking to shellfish farmers from around the country. And while they love what they do and see opportunities for the next generation, they're also seeing problems. Like Lissa Monberg, who grew up farming oysters in Lilliwaup, Washington.
This is my family's business. I grew up working on the tide flats when I was in middle school, and then I worked in the retail store through high school, and took over managing the retail store right out of college. So a great-great or a great-great-great started buying property out here, and we incorporated in 1922 as a timber company, and my grandfather started farming oysters in the 50s. Hama Hama is a pretty large employer in this community. We're definitely a small business overall, but we employ about 30 people. You know, on one hand, shellfish farming is just one of the more hopeful ways that humans can live on this world. You know, we can produce protein we don't use up fresh water, we don't use any chemicals, we don't have to feed them. It's like growing plants more than it is like farming an animal. And so it's a very passive way of producing protein. On the flip side, there's so much we don't know about the ocean that sometimes the future is a little less bright when you factor in ocean acidification and rising ocean temperatures and just all of the unknowns from this world that we're kind of hurtling into. The past couple of years, we've had these pretty high oyster mortality events where 30 to 75% of the oysters will die inexplicably. That's not unique to our beach. It's like kind of widespread across the industry as far as we can tell. We're committed to being in the oyster industry, but our family, you know, just hearing again and again and again about like how half of the oysters died, it does make you wonder about the future of the industry and like the future of farming. I do, you know, marketing for the company, and I would always struggle with how to talk about climate change with our consumers. On one hand, feel like the imperative, the need to talk about it. We have an obligation to our future generations of our family, future generations of humans on this earth, to at least talk about it. Because it's definitely going to take all of us. It's not just the industry advocating for it. It's going to take all of the community.
The oyster farmers I met in Alabama have had to deal with lots of major storms.
I'm Jackie Wilson, CEO and owner of Marina Jean's Oysters on Monlouis, about a mile south of here.
I'm Dottie Lawley, and I'm the CEO of Bama Bay Oyster Farm. We're here on the dock. Jackie and I have worked together for the whole time, really. Yeah. We've known each other. She checks water, and she calls me, and I tell her if her oysters are safe or not. We both love oysters.
We do. There was a time period, I think, from like 96 to about 2006, where there was at least a storm big enough to knock down a pier in less than a year's time.
We had 6 or 7.
And so it didn't seem feasible, I think, for many people to keep putting it up if it's just going to get knocked back down. The natural oyster population here in Mobile Bay has, I mean, it's almost non-existent at this point. And I think with us having oysters in the water, we're not replacing the natural oysters, but we're filling in the gap, I guess, of what they do for our natural resources. But at the same time, we need other people to work with us and help us maintain, because if we don't have a good crop, or if we don't have oysters down, we're not doing our part.
I also met Dennis and Alanka and their kids and grandkids, pioneering farmers in Florida.
We're the first oyster farm on the Florida East Coast. Well, we picked oysters kind of on a lark. The kids were interested in opening a business here. They moved into the community, and we all agreed that this was someplace that we all wanted to set down roots. So we would kayak and boat quite a bit and eat the oysters, and we would cull the small ones out, and we would drop them off at little sandy spots where the small ones were, and go back and check them in a few months, and they just really grew fast. And so one time the kids were talking about what to start a business on, and I said, well, why don't you start an oyster farm? And it sounded like a good idea. We researched it and ended up doing it. A decade ago, on average, there would be closures of 10 to 20 to 40 days a year from rainfall events, and they have precautionary closures to test the water after runoff, and they virtually always come back clean, but it closes you for a week. And in the last 5 or 8 years, we're seeing over 100 days of closures a year from rainfall events and algal blooms and the like. So that can be an issue. We're real environmental advocates for improving and restoring the lagoon, and that is essential for us to be successful in the long term.
We're working hard to really educate on why it all works the way it does, and really bring awareness of what the oysters do not only for our ecosystem, but what they do for your health. I mean, a lot of people don't even understand how healthy an oyster is as well for them, and then also what it can do for somebody's business.
I was an oyster farmer myself for several years, so the challenges these farmers face make sense to me. But something really clicked when I met Bill Mook. His business is a testament to what happens when a sharp mind with a relentless drive to make things better decides to grow oysters. When I met Bill, he'd been thinking a lot about climate change, and I began to see more clearly how we could work together to meet these challenges. These first conversations with Bill grew into the Shellfish Growers Climate Coalition.
Getting into this whole industry, it was more than just a job. It was something that I believe was a really good thing to do for the environment. I've always been an environmentalist. And I think the experience of launching this thing and seeing how people responded to it made me realize that pretty much everybody who gets into shellfish aquaculture shares that. And that was a really gratifying thing to see, and it made me feel so proud to be part of the shellfish growers.
Yeah.
So,
more than 100 now.
yeah.
That was something that early on I thought, okay, if we can get to 25, that would be great.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, we can get to 40, that'll be great. And, then 100 came in sight. And, we've got 20 states represented, which is every state that has aquaculture right now.
And pretty much all of the major farms and a lot of smaller farms have joined. And that was one of the things going back to the very, conception of the idea was this realization, and whether it's right or wrong, but it does seem like small business does carry a disproportionate amount of weight in terms of being able to influence policy and everything. And so getting all these small businesses behind it, I think, has been part of why we have a chance at making a difference.
The coalition represents every aspect of the supply chain, from equipment manufacturers to hatcheries, to growers and wholesalers and restaurant owners. Together, we're doing everything we can to improve people's understanding of climate change and its impacts on the food they love. We're talking to policymakers, sharing our stories so they realize how important it is to act now. It's not enough to adapt to climate change. We have to put on the brakes and reduce the carbon emissions that cause it. We have to get to the heart of the problem, and that is what these farmers are doing.
I went to the first big lobby event in DC, and we went door to door to all of our reps down there, and we were able to have really important conversations about our hardships with these really big global climate change issues. And now we have this opportunity to really share information among politicians and hopefully some real substantial change and bring everybody around this common goal.
I think that it has really brought a lot of farms from a lot of different geographic areas together. There's a lot more collaboration on a broader range of things. It just opened up communication lines that were not so open before.
You've involved not just us growers, but restaurants, purveyors of seafood. And that's just a really great thing because we're often out here kind of invisible. But to get chefs and restaurateurs and general public jazzed about this issue, that's where we're going to really make some progress.
What I know is that there are so many people who love the ocean and the taste of an oyster fresh from the sea just as much as I do. And when they hear the stories about how climate change is affecting shellfish growers right now, people listen and they get it. It's not just about what's on the raw bar, it's about people's jobs, their families, their communities, their way of life. Fighting climate change is really hard. It's easy to think it will happen to other people in other places, but it's right now, right here, as close as your dinner plate, as close as that small business down the street. These farmers and their stories help people see that we don't have time to waste.
We kind of have to stop bickering about what caused it or who caused it and just figure out how we're going to address it and how we're going to become more resilient, how we're going to adapt, and how we're going to just stop pulling carbon out of the ground and into the atmosphere. That has to stop. We're all part of that carbon economy, and we all need to come together to fix it.
Having this farm for the future of our family is why, we're doing it. Started this up with the notion of turning it over to the kids to operate and run and the grandkids to enjoy, and we'll step back and enjoy retirement.
Growing up on Mobile Bay was so influential to me. Literally, it influenced every facet of my life. And I love this bay, and I see the changes that are occurring in the world. And if I can do something to kind of help mitigate or stop that, I want to. Make sure that the bay is healthy and here for the next generation and the next budding oyster farmer who comes down and sees what Miss Dottie's doing and decides that's what she wants to do with her life.
My dream and my hope for this is that it takes on a life of its own, and I see that beginning to happen. And I think that's the other thing. It relates to all these other farms, taking this up and doing it with a passion that I guess I wasn't sure was there, but I'm so relieved to see that it is there.
Sometimes it's hard to care about the entire planet. It's too much. And it feels like what we can do is just one drop in an overwhelming ocean. But if you're moved by one person, one farmer, one small business, then you can find your motivation in these stories, and together, we really can make a difference.